Is Conor McGregor still a star or is he a washed up has been? Before we get into that, if you're new here, make sure you subscribe as we have brand new videos every single week. Of course, Conor McGregor is a star. No one's denying his notoriety. You know, he's in movies, he's a big name. But, Mark, is Conor McGregor still a star in combat sports?
Well, when you talk about Conor McGregor, everyone brings up his highlight reel, Chad Mendes, Jose Aldo, all them kind of things. You go, they were the best part of a decade ago now. I don't know how much give they've got in today's standard. Yeah, he knocked out Cowboy in 40 seconds in 2020. And let's not forget, he's only got one win at lightweight in a masterful, masterclass performance. But that was 2016. I
Yeah.
mean, come on, everyone brings him up as if he's still that same fighter. We don't know. But at the same time, when we've got nothing to compare it to, what do you expect us to think?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because his moments were so long ago, weren't they? You know, it was at least 4 years ago since we got a big highlight reel from him. But we've always said it before, UFC's it's one of these sports where it's filled with moments, not fights. You know, people don't talk about whole fights. They talk about little moments, little snippets. And Connor's got so many of those moments. I think that's still what he lives off and what some fans are still clinging on to almost like, oh, well, this is what he did. This is what he did. He did these amazing things. So that's what's keeping the interest alive in some sense, isn't it? And I guess, like you were saying there, it's we've got nothing to compare it to. What's he going to be like now? And I think that's what's keeping another interesting. Like if he does return, what's he going to be like after the leg break? Is he still going to have that speed? Is he going to have that precision, or is he going to come back an old man with a smashed up leg? You know, that's the fear for a lot of these fighters, isn't it?
I think with Conor McGregor, the thing is, if you were around to watch his rise, you probably still do have that like little comforting thing about him, and you
Yeah,
still hold him near and dear. You yourself, you're like that, aren't you? You watched his rise and you loved him. I
100%.
At the time I was watching a few other fights. Obviously, you can't deny his rise was happening at the same time. I didn't mind him, but then again, you kind of watch the full fights.
Mm.
The second Diaz fight, bit of a question mark on that, really. And you think, well, let's take his whole career. Can't argue his featherweight run. He was slicing through everyone.
Phenomenal.
Then when he took the lightweight gold off Eddie Alvarez and he just rode off into the sunset, you go, well, that's it. If that was it there, if he'd have walked away, then it'd have been called, a coward because he'd ran away. He just got to the top, mic drop. But at the same time, with hindsight now, you go, probably should have done that, but it'd have been the surprise.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because, you know, with those moments, they are so good, they are so interesting. And like you were saying before, people have a sentimental attachment. And I do in a sense because, you know, I've watched the UFC for a long, long, long time, but it was always sort of on and off, you know, because as a UK fight fan, you can't stay up at 3 a.m. for every single fight. So it's just not worth it. It was very much oh, I'll check that out and I'll see a couple fights here and there. And I enjoyed it. But that rise of Conor McGregor got me invested in the UFC full time. Like, you know, I watched almost every pay-per-view after that. I watched so much stuff. So I think in some ways I still am clinging on to that sentimental value in the sense of he brought me to this sport that I love. And when you were attached someone to something like that, it's hard to look at them, you know, badly. You know, I'll be a fan forever, even if he's beating up old men.
Yeah, well, that's happened, Dwayne. That's happened.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I do get that aspect, but I think what annoys me more, I think, is the hype around him. You could be talking about the middleweight division and someone brings him up and you think, what relevance does this have? It doesn't. And I think just trying to pluck on the nostalgia strings and just keep that sentimental value. Do you remember the old documentary Notorious? I
Mm,
watched that when it came out, and it was just before the Floyd Mayweather fight. So it left it quite ominous. Like, oh, look, the world's his oyster. What's he going to do next?
yeah,
Then they did that McGregor Forever. And I watched all of it because I wanted to have an honest opinion. I didn't just want some internet opinion like too many people have these days. And I
yeah.
literally watched that and I thought, you could have got the same content with any other fighter, with Clay Guida. It's just back and forth with wins and losses, and then like a training camp. It's just because of his personality that people tuned in. The
Yeah.
actual in ring, the actual combat of it, you think, well, there's nothing special in this.
No,
It's a
definitely.
reality show. It was like watching the Osbournes or something.
Yeah, well,
A lot less
it was a
swearing.
strange, yeah. Well, it was a strange one, wasn't it? Because I did enjoy the documentary. It was a good watch. I had a fun time watching it, but it didn't bring any new information I'd not
No.
seen. And even Connor said afterwards, he said he was disappointed with it. He was like, well, they did film it for like a year after this. It's like they just stopped. Like they didn't show any of it afterwards. They didn't show his recovery. That's what I wanted to see. I want to see how's Connor dealing with this injury. But I guess if you're sticking a needle in your veins full of steroids, I guess they can't film that.
Yeah, exactly. That, like I've said before, Conor McGregor's turnaround, it definitely isn't just chicken rice and broccoli and a bit of creatine in there.
It's yoga and good living. Yeah, that's what it is. That's all he's doing.
Yeah, he's like like an influencer. They miss out the little capsule of tren. I'm like, I just have a banana a day.
But Mark, I am looking forward to the Clay Guida documentary that you seem so
Oh,
excited
we've
for.
seen it. We've seen it in the McGregor Forever one. It's exactly the same content. It was just there was nothing new about it. Like you say, you could have got it with any fighter.
Yeah,
I remember watching it, and at the end, I thought maybe it is because I never latched onto that the rocket that McGregor was strapped to on his rise. But I was watching it like I don't see the mystique in Conor McGregor anymore. I never really did before.
no,
It's
it's hard,
easy for
isn't
me
it?
to say when I'm not opposite him in a bloody octagon, isn't it? But in the same sense of like, he's just a bloke. It's like the second Dustin fight, and he said at first I was a bit starstruck, the one at featherweight. He said the
Mm,
second one, he was just a man in front of me, and you're
yeah.
like, yeah, it's true, he is, and ring rust, maybe that played a factor as well. I think he bit off a lot more than he could chew in the sense
Mm,
of the caliber of fighter. And what annoyed me about that fight is everyone was talking about look how far Connor's fallen, not look how far along Dustin's come. You know, it,
100%.
it was just a mismatch, really.
It's felt so weird, didn't it? It felt like a lot of people wrote Dustin off. And I remember just before the fight were about to start, I texted you, didn't I? I said, I think there's going to be an upset tonight. I think Dustin's got this in the bag. And he did. It's just that thing, you cannot come back to an opponent of that level. Dustin Poirier is so good. And for Conor to take all that time off and come back and think he can beat Dustin Poirier without, at least a couple of warm-up fights, I think was ridiculous. I think it was a stupid mistake on his part, a stupid mistake on his management's part, and a stupid mistake on the UFC's part. He should have. That's a fight that you could have done much further down the line. Get Conor coming back, have some warm ups, fight people like Cowboy, RDA, big names in the sport, but people he can beat. And I'm not really into the whole ideal matchmaking or whatever. But he's coming back off a long period of time. You need these sort of warm up fights. It's just the way you have to compete in that sense, can't you? You can't just jump in the
Well, I
deep
think,
end.
yeah, that was jumping in the deep end without a life jacket on. But I believe, to take my hat off to him, I believe that the next fight that we have scheduled of Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler, that's probably a good fight because we've said it before. Chandler, he don't fight with his head, does he?
No,
He just storms forward. There's plenty of opportunities for Conor, and I'm exactly the same as you. You can't when it's real fighting. You can't exactly say, well, a couple of warm up fights
no,
just to warm him up, loosen him up, and get him back into swing. Because you go, what is it? Fixed fighting then? You go, but this is a great opportunity for him because Chandler's a big name. He's got
yeah,
knockout power. I don't care what anyone says. People love to hate Chandler. I think he's the best thing for UFC in a long
yeah.
time for the lightweight division. Spruced it up completely.
Definitely, I love seeing Michael Chandler fight. But with Michael Chandler, do you think that's one of the most disappointing parts of all of this? With Connor and Chandler not fighting, we're missing out on Michael Chandler moments, right? Big fights. He's near the end of his career. He does not have long left, and we're missing out on these opportunities.
Absolutely. And it's it's a bit of a shame. I mean, as fans, we don't know the half of what goes on with contract signing, negotiations, and
Mm.
recovery stories, that kind of thing. We just find out bits and bats what MMA and media and news will allow us. But I'm the same as Dana White. It doesn't help when you've got MMA news being one of the most toxic there is. If Conor farts, they all of a sudden, oh, Conor McGregor interview, talking out his ass again. It's just one of those, and you go, you can't believe it all. But if
No.
this fight does get announced by the official UFC, there's a couple of other sources what you do actually trust, which I'm not going
Yeah.
to name, where you go, all right, yeah, it's actually got some credibility. But you look back now, if you just type in Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler on any
Oh,
social media and search the posts, search even as far back as about a year, and it's like done deal, signed for August or whatever, something like that. And you think, see, it's all a load of shite. You know what?
yeah, it really is, isn't it? And that sort of moves me on to my next point, Mark. With this constant back and forth, Connor and Chandler are fighting. No, they're not fighting. Yeah, they're fighting. Now they're on tough together. They're going to fight in the summer. Oh, no, that's not. It's going to happen next year. Or Connor's now going to fight International Fight Week. Oh, now he's doing a movie. All this stuff, all this constant back and forth. It now makes it difficult to be invested right now. It's hard to care. Like you hear these things, you think, well, don't mean nothing now until they're in that octagon, right?
It's weird. It's like, you know, when like a child star on like some sort of show or something, everyone wants a piece of them on an interview. They want them to do this, want them to do that. And it's like, oh, what, we're just doing side quests then, rather than just focusing on the next thing. You understand what I mean there, where like everyone wants a piece and it just get on with the fight. It's your primary job, you know. And I believe as a fan, we have the right to say that, you know, because we
Yeah,
don't sign
definitely.
the contracts, we don't sign the paychecks, but we just like to see fights happening. And this one is a bit of a dream fight on paper, so let it happen. Don't become
Right.
like boxing where it's like, oh, I wonder what would have happened if these two would have crossed paths, even though they were in the same weight division at the same time and the fight got announced and then politics got involved. Don't become like boxing. MMA,
Mm.
for me personally, has surpassed boxing a million times over. It's lapped it.
Yeah,
But
it's the best sport in the world, isn't it? It's
this
so
kind of
good.
thing is going to bring it down, I think. If more negotiations and that kind of stuff gets involved, I don't think it's going to do
Yeah,
well.
definitely. Because it was interesting because, you know, there seemed to be a constant back and forth between Connor and the UFC, and a lot of people going, "Oh well, the UFC's holding Connor back. They're not letting him fight, and all this stuff." And then I saw Dana on an interview with Usman and Cejudo, and he said, "Okay," he said, "Right, say I booked the fight right now. What's Conor McGregor doing right now? He's doing a world press tour for his film, which he's contractually obliged to do. Do you think I can book him in a fight?" I think, yeah, fair. Good point.
But what happened before that, before the filming started?
That's true,
We'd done
yeah.
tough, you
Yeah.
know, and you think, I think, I'm presuming that the ball was dropped multiple times somewhere along the timeline.
By
I don't
both
know.
parties, yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna say I'm not saying it's directly by one person, but
No.
I think it should have as soon as Tough is announced, that's meant to be the big finale. The coaches fight against each other.
Yeah.
Injuries happen. It's happened multiple times over. Rampage and Rashad didn't happen straight away. You know, Junior Dos Santos and Brock Lesnar, they didn't end up actually fighting. But that's the whole idea. It's like you watch these up and comers or the prospects versus the veterans, as this one was. And then the secondary attraction is the coaches that are going to fight towards the end of this. But, you know, it's coming up to a year now. Like, it's
Yes.
crazy, isn't it? You know, at first, when the first episode was announced, I think you did a series on it as well, The Ultimate Fighter, each episode.
Mm.
And it was, people were excited just because they see Connor. And obviously, when he shoved Michael Chandler, everyone's, oh, it's going to be announced tomorrow. You think,
Yeah.
oh,
The problem with Tough is it was well, they showed all the good bits in the trailers, and like, oh, watching, you think we've seen this. I've seen this bit already.
yeah.
It. One, I'm not much of a reality TV kind of guy anyway, so I didn't think I was going to enjoy it. So, but we won't talk about Tough too much. Let's move on quickly. But sort of with, you know, like we were saying, with this constant back and forth, it is hard to get invested in Connor, right? It's like I cannot get invested in this return. But because he's got such a mainstream appeal, do you think that'll keep Conor relevant in the UFC and keep these announcements relevant for a long time?
I seriously think, and it's not just because I'm not a lover, I'm not a fan. I seriously think if he loses his next fight, that'll probably be it.
Mm.
I think he's got a bit of credibility. Well, he's got a lot of credibility right now, but I think he's teetering on the edge. And if Chandler was to wipe him out in the first couple of rounds, I think that'd be him done now with combat sports, and he can go off. He's still got that star power to go make movies, to be in series, to even be a coach, that kind of stuff, or exhibition fights.
Yeah.
But I think that would even the biggest Conor McGregor fans would have to face reality there and just say, nah, he's not. You know, you can't imagine him versus Islam now.
No, definitely not. And that's the difficulty, isn't it? Is like when Conor returns, what kind of fighter is he going to be, and what kind of competition is he going to be fighting at? Because he said something really interesting in an interview recently. He said I said, I want to fight forever. And he said, but I'll have to recalibrate my competition. So even he understands, like, yeah, if he does want to keep fighting, he cannot fight people like Islam. He cannot fight these top contenders, but he can adjust who he's fighting. He could do another rematch with Nate. He could fight someone like Tony Ferguson, RDA, those kind of like big names, right? Rather than, right, we're going to fight for titles. We're just going to have fun fights.
Yeah, and I think the chances for those kind of fights are dwindling rapidly as well.
Yeah.
Just with those names there, you've got RDA, who's like, I really like him. He's a former champion,
Mm.
fantastic fighter, but again, that was like 2016. Now,
Yeah.
sometimes you don't even notice that he's fighting on a card
No.
unless he is the main event of a fight night. You've got Nate Diaz, who's, what is it, pushing 40 now.
Something like that.
He's got a fight coming up with Masvidal. And I always thought that they kept that in the bag because now it's 1-1 and they're like, we can cash that in whenever we want. Whenever we
Yeah.
fancy a few quid, we'll just have that trilogy fight. You've got Tony Ferguson, who's tied for the most losses consecutively in a row in the UFC, and you think, well, now we're going into this territory where like each fighter has a handicap
Mm.
almost, and you think, what would he do there? What's the alternative to fight up and comers? What, young, hungry guys who want to be the dude to batter Connor? It's a
Mm.
big, big paycheck. But I think as fans, I think the credibility of Connor fighting at the top level is dwindling rapidly. I think if we don't get this fight this year, then I think all interest will be gone.
100%. I don't know if all interest will necessarily be gone, but in the sense of him being a top contender, definitely. I mean, that is out of the water, isn't it? If he loses to Chandler, he's done for. But I think we will see him two more times minimum because that's what's on his contract, and I do not think that Connor is going to get stuck in a UFC contract. What I think the plan is, he's going to come out, fight Chandler, win or lose, and then fight one other name, and then he's out of his contract and he can renegotiate. So, what do you do with someone like Connor? This big star. You know, hate him or love him, he's a huge name. What kind of money do you offer him? What kind of fights do you offer him? And it feels like there's not much of a place in the UFC for him anymore, especially in two more fights' time. So I think the only options for the UFC are, right, okay, we'll give Connor a percentage of the UFC. We'll bring him in as a partner, even if it's just 2% or whatever, or however it works. Put him on the board of directors for TKO. Bring him in of that level, and he can have a couple of exhibition fights here and there. Or he goes off, leaves the UFC for good, and he goes into Saudi boxing where all the money is. And I think that's where we might see him. We'll see him versus Nate boxing, him versus Masvidal boxing, and it's him versus Manny Pacquiao and all this kind of stuff. But I'm not interested in that. I don't care as a fan, but it's going to bring in a lot of money. And I think that's where we could see him go next.
It's a story as old as time, isn't it? Though, like you throw enough money at something, and it'll probably happen.
Mm.
That's why I know a little bit off topic, but that's why a lot of people are saying boxing's getting a revival now because it's getting a lot of money thrown back at it. And it might actually make me a little bit of a fan if super fights continue to happen. With McGregor, he doesn't need the money at all. A lot of these
No.
fighters don't. But at the same time, won't say no to a new yacht. Somewhere else he can do cocaine. But But I mean, win, lose or draw. When Conor McGregor's on a card, I'm an hypocrite because I will tune in. But then
That's the
again, I'll
thing,
tune
isn't
in for
it?
people for fighters that I hate as well. So
Mm.
you think, well, how long will that last though? Because I think, imagine this would probably be just as bad as a defeat if Conor McGregor was fighting on a card and it wasn't the main event.
Well, that's
That
a really interesting point. That's what Connor said that recently in an interview. So he said when he returns, he said he's thinking his next fight with Chandler perhaps should be 3 rounds, not 5 rounds. And he said, I'd be happy to open the card. I'd be happy to be the first fight on the card. Would that give you a bit of respect from Connor? Like, oh, yeah, well done. You're not pushing yourself up at the top, doing a 5 rounder. You're the co main, or you're opening up the main card, doing a 3 rounder. What do you sort of think about that situation?
Well, it's strange because, like, say, we were actually speaking in another video recently about Bo Nickel doesn't get to decide where he is on the card because he's on the UFC 300 main
Mm.
card. But when you're such a name as Conor McGregor, he probably does have a lot of pull in that. If that happened, you don't want to dwell too far in the territory of, oh, thank you, Mr. McGregor. You're so humble, all that kind of stuff. But I always like the idea of an absolute banger opening the main card anyway,
Yeah,
because it keeps you just driven right awake. As a UK fan, again, awake for the first one. You might have a couple of ones that, probably aren't as interesting to you, and then the co-main and the main event. If this was to happen opening up the main card, I think it'd be a great move for all the other fighters as well,
yeah,
on the card, because obviously if you're following Conor McGregor, you want to put on a great performance, don't you?
definitely. It's ideal. I think it's ideal for everyone. I think if you put Connor, say 302, right? Not as the main event, but on a three-rounder, co-main, even an opening up the main card, right? It's great for Connor because he doesn't have to train 4, 5 rounds.
Excuse me,
I,
Dwayne.
that's okay, don't worry. Um, he doesn't need to train for 5 rounds. He he knows, right, okay, I've only got to have energy for 3 rounds. I can go as hard as I want. And Chandler versus Connor at full pace for 3 rounds. Oh, that's better than a 5 rounder. Stick that on. I would love it. The
Yeah.
pace would be so intense, so fun. It'd be such a good watch. And I think that's ideal for Connor to return to, right? Like I said before, I'm not interested in making ideal matchmaking for him, but physically coming off that big injury, that seems an ideal setup, right?
Surely, yeah, to come into a 5 round fight when Connor's ballooned up for a film as well, to come back down. His
Yeah.
cardio weren't the best anyway, even before when he were an active fighter. And
Mm.
Chandler likes to push the pace, because I don't think he's got great cardio, obviously, all fighters do, but he's not known for his endurance. He's not like known like Cain Velasquez, where he comes out into the fifth round as fresh as the first, because the pace is ridiculous that Chandler
Yeah.
fights at. So let's just have a 3 round absolute war, like you did with Justin Gaethje.
Yeah.
Let's have that on the card. I mean, because I don't think the UFC would have the face to put that fight as the main event, but as a 3 rounder. So I think if it was a 3 rounder, that would
Mm.
indicate that it is not the main event.
Well, it's interesting because I think they could get away with it if they did put Conor versus Chandler as the main event as a 3 rounder. Because don't forget, Mark, 5 round fights were around since what was it 2011? Like they all used to be 3 rounders. So they only just, I said just it's over 10 years ago, but it's not that old in the world of the sport. You think, well, actually, I guess they could get away with it. I'm not saying they should, though. I don't think they should. I think Connor's co-main would be fantastic. I think that'd be really good. But you'd have to have the right main event because if he was co-main for Islam, he would not do that. He'd be fuming. It'd have to be someone he respected, like Sean O'Malley or Izzy or something like that, a big name who he can get on with.
That's the strange thing, isn't it? Where you think, yeah, he might have been the star boy, but he worked for the company, and you think,
Yeah,
I maybe it's just me being a bit of a cynic, but you think you don't want to give someone too much pull in the company
I
like
agree.
that, because then more favors start getting asked. Imagine that in any other job. Oh, you make us the most money. Yeah, so I want shares. I want this. You're like, well, no. We're doing fine without you. You just do give us a big boost. So I think like with a bit of pull on like where he is in the card,
Mm,
even where he wants to fight next. When all them stipulations get added just for him and just off his back, I think that's where you're like, you might be shooting yourself in the foot there by allowing him to do all this, because what's he going to demand for his next fight?
yeah.
You know,
You've got to be careful with it, and you can't just give everything that Connor wants because you put yourself in a very, very sticky situation. But let's finish off, Mark, actually talking about this fight and assuming it does happen, assuming. How do you think this fight plays out? What's your predictions for Michael Chandler versus Conor McGregor?
it's it's very hard because we don't know what Connor's going to be there. Like we
Mm,
said, judging off the last fights, I don't think anyone can give an accurate prediction, and one that they are so sure of as well. I think just judging off the pace and ring rust, I'm predicting like a second round knockout for Michael Chandler, TKO, not a flat out
mm,
knockout, because you think, ring rust, pace, all that. And Connor, because he doesn't have the karate stance in his last fight, he just came out with the sort of solid boxing stance. I think Chandler's just going to make a mockery out of him. I don't think there'll be any wrestling. Chandler's a great wrestler, but does he use it? Nope.
There's going to be no wrestling. And don't forget, Michael Chandler's going to have ring rust as well. Like, don't forget, he has not fought for over 2 years now. And it could be 3 years by the time Conor and Chandler fight. But I think Michael Chandler is a fantastic athlete. Michael Chandler's a great fighter. He almost beat Charles Oliveira. He almost beat Justin Gaethje. He almost beat Dustin Poirier. And I think we're going to look back at this fight, and this is going to be the moment where Michael Chandler almost beat Conor McGregor. Almost is not good enough. I think Conor McGregor is going to slice through him and he's going to KO him within a round. I just think it's just as good as Michael Chandler is. He fights like a potato. He's an idiot. He's got all the skills. He's got all the tools. He's athletic. He's strong. But he's too entertaining. He's going to come forward and he's going to be open up for counters consistently. And, Conor doesn't need his leg anymore. If he gets that left hook in, he's bang, done, over. So I think that's unfortunately the future I see for Michael Chandler. By the way, I really, really do hope that fight happens one day because I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So that's been us talking about Conor McGregor. Thank you, everyone, for watching. If you can like, comment, and subscribe, it really does help us out.